Hey, what's up guys, my name is Shoaib and welcome to the first episode of Made as Simple as Possible, where I will be taking complex ideas and concepts and breaking them down so you can better understand them. If you find this video helpful, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let's get right into it. First of all, keep in mind aperture, shutter speed, and ISO together determine the exposure of your image. Therefore, collectively, they make up what's called the exposure triangle. That means in order to get a desired look for your image, you must learn to balance all three of these parameters. First up, we have shutter speed. Shutter speed determines how long your shutter stays open. A shutter speed of 1/60 means the shutter stays open for 1/60th of a second. Similarly, a shutter of 2 means the shutter stays open for 2 whole seconds. Shutter speed is used to control how much motion you want in a picture. The lower the shutter speed, the longer your shutter stays open, and therefore the more light is let inside the camera. The higher the shutter speed, the shorter amount of time the shutter stays open, and therefore the shorter amount of time light is let inside the camera, and as a result less motion is captured. Therefore, shutter speed can be used to control for motion blur in your pictures. For example, sports photography often use very high shutter speed. This is in order to allow for those crisp, motionless shots of moving objects. On the flip side, really cool night photography of the open sky often involves very low shutter speed. This is to allow the camera to capture as much of that faint light as possible, giving you those amazing night sky shots. So, to summarize, low shutter speed means more light, means more motion captured. High shutter speed means less light and less motion captured. Good? Next up is ISO. ISO uses your camera's software to determine the sensitivity of your camera's sensor to light. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive your camera's sensor is to light, and the lower the ISO, the less sensitive it is to light. Now, it is easy to think that the ISO should be kept as high as possible because you obviously want to capture as much light as you possibly can, right? It is actually the very opposite, because increasing your ISO also adds noise to your image, making it look grainy. So if you crank your ISO all the way up, your picture might end up looking more like it was taken on a Nokia 3600 rather than a professional camera. Therefore, ISO should be kept as low as possible for your given scenario circumstances to avoid any unnecessary noise in your pictures. For example, when outside during the day, my ISO is usually 100, but when inside I bump it up to 200, 300, 400, and so on, depending on how dark the surroundings are. Lastly, we come to aperture, usually the hardest of the three to wrap your head around. Aperture refers to the size of the opening inside your lens, controlled by a set of blades. It determines how much light will enter your camera. If you shoot with the aperture wide open, more light will enter your camera, and your image will be lighter. On the contrary, if the aperture is closed down to a tiny hole, less light will enter the camera and your image will appear darker. Aperture sizes are measured by f-stops. The smaller the f-stop number, the larger the lens opening, the more light enters the camera. The larger the f-stop number, the smaller the lens opening, and the less light enters the camera. Yes, it is an inverse relationship, and this is what really confuses a lot of people. But don't worry, this next part is going to make it a lot easier to understand aperture in terms of depth of field. Because aperture also determines the depth of field, and it is this function that it is specifically used for. And I want you to keep that in mind. Aperture equals the depth of field of your image. Everything that I've told you about aperture up to this point, that's how it works. But this is how it is specifically used. The depth of field is really simple. It determines how much of your image is in focus. A smaller depth of field means only a small part of your image is in focus. This is used for those portrait shots involving that aesthetically pleasing blurred background and that impressive bokeh. On the other side, the larger depth of field means everything is nice and sharp and is in focus. This is ideal for landscape photography. Now remember that confusing relationship between f-stop numbers and the size of the lens and how much light enters and so on? Well, forget all about that. Think of f-stop numbers as measuring the depth of field. A smaller f-stop numbers means a smaller depth of field. A larger f-stop numbers means a larger depth of field. As simple as that. Well, that is mostly it, guys. Now, of course, it gets a lot more complex, but for beginners, and I'm assuming a lot of you guys watching are beginners, this is all you need to know. So, to quickly recap, shutter speed controls motion blur. Lower shutter speed equals more motion, higher shutter speed equals less motion. ISO equals the sensitivity of your camera sensor to light. Higher ISO means more sensitivity and more light, as well as more noise. Lower ISO means less sensitivity and less light, as well as less noise. And lastly, aperture controls the depth of field. A smaller f-stop number means smaller depth of field. A larger f-stop number means a larger depth of field. Well, that is it for this video, guys. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And in the comments, let me know if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to help. Thank you all, and I'll see you guys in the next video.